And just imagine if everyone would have the microphone turned on, everyone speaking out loud, you would have the speaker at maximum level. How would you feel? Probably rather overwhelmed, right? And that's the way a lot of autistic people define the hearing. This is a kind of sensory experience in terms of hearing that is described in autism. And this is the kind of sensory alterations that we're going to talk about today. And for some of you, autism might not be so familiar, so I want to start with some background on the main topic. And so Autism Spectrum Disorder is a complex neurodevelopmental condition that has influences on different domains of functioning. So going from sensory processing, but also motor functioning and more complex behaviors like social functioning. And this is behaviorally defined by the presence of alterations in social and communication skills and by the presence of restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviors and interests. And more relatively recently, alterations in sensory processing have also been added as diagnostic criteria for autism. And most research, historically speaking, has focused on the social, communicative, and more cognitive features of the condition of autism. But recently, research has been more and more focused also on the sensory alteration domain. And that is because of the implications that these alterations may have on what we call the core features of autism, that are the social communication skills and the repetitive behaviors. So it is possible that these alterations, early alterations in sensory in processing of sensory information and the integration of multisensory information have an effect, a cascade effect on higher level skills, higher level social and cognitive functions. So sensory alterations have been investigated in autism and rather frequently observed in people with autism, and they have been organized in different behavioral patterns that can be defined as hypo-responsiveness, and by that I mean delayed or absent response to sensory stimuli, then hyper-responsiveness, and then I mean an increased aversive or even avoidant response to stimuli, and the sensory-seeking behaviors that are more about intense and repeated engagement with some specific sensory features of the stimuli that could be like the fabric of clothing. And previous studies have found associations between these sensory features early in development with the core features of autism throughout childhood, and in particular, hyperresponsiveness and sensory-seeking behaviors observed at the end of the second year of life have been associated to later childhood outcomes in terms of social and language skills. So the investigation of these sensory alterations in autism might not just add another piece to the puzzle, but might also be critical to improve our understanding of autism as a whole, and then in particular the understanding of those biological mechanisms that may be underlying the emergence of the core symptoms. In particular, for the focus of this symposium will be the social symptoms. And the association of these sensory alterations with the core social symptoms may also provide a potential target for therapeutics. So you can understand the great research interest in this sensory alteration area. The main question for this topic has always been like whether these sensory differences, these sensory alterations are actually primary in autism and then have a cascade effect on higher level functioning, or these are secondary features of autism. And so, for instance, some theories have posed that these may be the result of some learned behaviors. And the interpretation of findings so far on sensory alterations have been complicated by the high level of variability in the manifestations of these alterations in autism as a whole. The autism spectrum as a whole has a high level of variability in manifestations. And also, it is possible that these alterations may not be really specific to autism, but they have been also observed in other neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD or also synesthesia, as we will hear more about today. And finally, we have some, it is rather difficult to design specific tasks that can precisely probe the complex and intricate nature of neural networks underlying sensory processing and the multisensory integration. So today in this webinar, we will hear full presentation that will address some of these points, and they will show recent findings and novel approaches for the investigation of alterations in sensory processing as observed in autism,